Portability is a fairly recent law in the last couple of years, and what happened was in the old days when someone would come into my office and let's say it's a surviving spouse and the spouse that passed away, they didn't have a trust. While the spouse was in my office, I was having to explain to that surviving spouse that the exemption was lost. So in that situation, we were encouraging people to have a trust, so we make sure we each have an exemption. However, under this new law, portability, the law allows what we call DSUE, DSUE, the deceased spouse's unused exemption, to be ported over to the surviving spouse. So a simple example would be as if the exemption was $12 million, that would mean that a married couple would have $24 million of exemption, even if they didn't have the trust done where it was split into two trusts with one becoming irrevocable. So nowadays what we are doing is we are actually creating trusts because of the exemption being so high that at the first death the trust splits again into two trusts, or three if necessary, but what happens is they both or all the trusts are taxable at the second death. However, with the exemption being so high and the portability being elected on an estate tax return, that now we don't have any estate tax at the second death, and on top of that, we don't have any income tax if the assets are capital assets and they are sold at the second death. Prior to that, at the first death, we were having half of the assets become irrevocable, and also making them so that the basis of the assets did not get what we referred to as a step up, and therefore at the second death, those assets are now income taxable. So on the new process, by being able to do the trust the way we're doing it nowadays, we can now not only avoid the estate tax, we can avoid the income tax. So the portability is, and the IRS has made it very simple. Once someone passes away, they file what is called an estate tax return, and on that estate tax return, they have a portability election that is already, the only way you don't get the portability election, you actually have to check a box to elect out of it. So it's a very simple process that makes sure that everyone who files this return gets this election and gets to preserve the deceased spouse's unused exemption, which is very important because we do not know what the future will bring for tax law. We know that the way the tax law is written, the exemption is growing, and it has started at 11.18 million, and it is indexed to inflation, so it will grow, but it is set to expire on December 31st, 2025. That does not mean that the Congress or the next president can change that and make it expire sooner or do something even more drastic. But the likelihood is that that exemption will go down somewhat, as it is set in 2026 to go down to the exemption from 2017 plus inflation. So we know that the exemption is going to be fairly high. It'll be at least for a married couple over $10 or $11 million, which means that most estates will not be taxable. So that is why our focus has shifted from avoiding estate tax to avoiding income tax.